Everyone, and welcome to Cotton Connects, the video series that the ICAC has created to keep the supply chain connected and informed so we can all get back to work as soon as possible once we conquer this stubborn virus. And today we are having a follow-up discussion with Mr. Christian Schindler, who is the Director General of the International Textile Manufacturers Federation. So thank you for joining us once again, Christian.
You're welcome.
Good deal. Okay, so a little more than a month ago, back on April 16th, we talked about the initial results you were getting from a survey of your members to see how bad the pain out there is for textile manufacturers. And at the time, it was bad and getting worse. Now we have results from the third survey. So why don't we pick up right there with what you're seeing in the change from the last survey to the newest one.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, that's correct. We started with this series of surveys in the end of March and have in the meantime conducted a third one. We are about to start a fourth one. So at the end of May, we will know more what our industry feels like in this current ongoing crisis. But the results of the third survey pretty much confirmed what everybody was expecting, that both orders and turnover numbers deteriorated. To put it in some plain numbers, at the second survey, orders were down around 33%. Now at the end of the third survey, which was at the end of April, orders were down globally by minus 41% on average. So on average obviously means that there are some who are doing better, but some are obviously doing also worse. The number for expected turnover for this year compared to last year deteriorated a little more, from minus 30% to minus 33%. So the estimates for the entire year didn't change that much, but are pretty much constant at a very low level. We are very curious to see how this develops and whether there is any movement in that number, which depends, of course, very much of developments in the next few weeks and months. Hopefully, this number will not go down further, to 40%, but possibly improve if consumption is picking up again, and that depends on so many different factors, like will there be a second peak? Will there be a second lockdown? How are consumers behaving? Will they change their consumption behavior? Did governments, did central banks do the right things to support the industry and their workers, that they feel safe at both physically but also economically and socially? We will see how this will play out in the coming months.
Christian, last week I spoke with Bruce Atherley, who is with the Cotton Council International. And we talked a little bit about demand, and he explained the difference between demand postponement and flat out demand destruction. Instead of, purchases put off for later, but they're still going to make it, demand destruction means that sale is gone and it's never coming back. When you talk about the financial losses, the economic losses, and the turnover in employment, do you have a sense of how much of that can come back when things pick up? I mean, are those 33 or 40%, whatever horrible number you just quoted, are those jobs going to be there if business picks back up, or are we looking at a permanent destruction of some part of the textile manufacturers industry?
Difficult. It depends what you see under permanent. Permanent means that this consumption would never come back. I think it's a more question of when it comes back. And many people in our industry, and that is really summarizing a discussion we had within ITMF between ITMF board members and other members, they see that there is a certain destruction, at least this year and next year. They are expecting that demand will not recover as quickly as possibly expected, or as this was the case in 2009 after the financial crisis, for different reasons. The impact of this crisis is much bigger and much broader than it was in 2009. More industry are affected in general, but also more industry are affected for an extended period of time. Just thinking about the airline industry, the hospitality industry, tourism. These are huge industries in terms of turnover and in terms of employment. And if this turnover, this employment doesn't come back quickly as it seems at the moment, for the foreseeable future at least, there will be a restructuring of these industry in terms of the size of these industries, and therefore also income. So disposable income overall will be lower than it was a few months ago, and it will take much longer to ever come back to the levels it was last year. So therefore, I think there is a certain temporarily destruction, yes, and it really depends how quickly these industry can recover, and this again depends on many different things. How quick a vaccine can be developed and produced in the next months and next years. Nobody really knows how this will work out, but the sooner the better. But nobody can expect that 2021 will be, back to normal. There will be a new normal, which will be impacted by this crisis into 2021. At least that's the expectation of most of our members, as far as I have collected the opinions, both anecdotal opinions, but also in our surveys.
Yeah, so we're not entirely sure when this is going to end, but let's talk a little bit more on the bright side. Let's talk a little bit about a recovery. Do you have any idea what a recovery would look like? The beginnings of a recovery will look like for textile manufacturers. There's probably not much we can compare this to historically, but is there some kind of chronology we can look at in the supply chain where it starts here and then somebody has to restart this thing, and given how interconnected the world is today, it's hard to see how that's going to happen. When you start a car, the starter does one thing and it starts the next thing and then the whole engine goes. What's that going to look like for the textile industry?
The textile industry is very much correlated with GDP. So if global GDP goes down, textile production, textile consumption, and therefore production will go down, and vice versa. So if we see that GDP is picking up again, trade then, as a consequence, is picking up again, this will mean that also textile consumption should go up. To what level is always a question, are textiles an essential product that people are really looking for? Is there demand for textiles as strong as before, which is depending on different factors? Again, consumer demand for textiles as compared to consumer demand for, electronics. Certainly in the last few weeks and months, demand has shifted to other product categories like electronics or other services, TV or streaming services. So that really depends on that. But as a rule of thumb, one can say if the economy does well and better, textiles will do better. That's for sure. And then, of course, the textile companies certainly will have to look at the market and anticipate what consumers are looking for. And certainly with this health crisis, I think many of textile and apparel producers and brands and retailers, of course, will look into these potentially new products, wellness products, health products, to incorporate functions into textiles that serve that demand for better wellness, health control, health functions. So I think that's a big industry, and this will most probably grow.
Well, you actually led me into the next question very well when you were talking about technical textiles and maybe some future demand, what we're going to be expecting from our apparel and clothing. Now that we've gone through all this pain, Christian, have we learned some hard lessons? I hope that when this is all over, we can say now that we've seen what happens, we can take some steps to prevent this next time. I don't know if that's really the case. I don't know if you can do anything to prepare for when consumer demand drops to zero. But, kind of looking at what happened this last time, is there anything we can do to mitigate the impact of the next time this happens? Like, maintaining more cash reserves or shortening the supply chains or making it more regional. So is there anything that we can glean out of this mess that will help us the next time?
I think it would be dangerous if we didn't draw some conclusions, from this crisis. And while you are absolutely right, that a pandemic is a pandemic, it's a global event, so you can't hide on a different planet, or you can't access a different market. And if you're in textiles, you're in textiles. It's affected by lockdowns. It's not like other products that I mentioned before, like electronics or other services that might still be available. Obviously, essential products, like food that you can still buy in the supermarket. But I think most companies will definitely look into their supply chain, and I think retailers will do that too, and the whole supply chain will try to make them more resilient in the sense that the supply chain is not optimal, but robust, more robust. What do I mean by saying that? So optimal means you really squeeze every little bit out of your supply chain, not considering any risks that there might be, where may they be political risks. Suddenly a country is let's assume the worst, is in a war, or has an embargo, or has a health issue. You don't necessarily only have to have pandemics. You can have epidemics in a certain country or region. So I think companies along the whole supply chain will take into consideration risks in the future that they kind of ignored because they are black swan incidents. They exist, but they are so unlikely that you don't consider them, that you ignore them and hope for the best. But obviously, since scientists are predicting that this is not the last pandemic that we are seeing, and it might not even be the worst that we have seen, but that pandemics can even become worse, which I really hope I will not experience in my lifetime, and I don't wish that anybody to experience. But the scientists say this is only a question of time. It's not whether or not it happens, but when it happens. So therefore, again, I think they will look at making their supply chains more robust, which means that it will become a little more expensive. You know, you don't rely on one supplier, you consider two suppliers. You don't rely on one region, you consider to have a backup kind of supplier in your vicinity. And I think that will be the case for most companies if they are in a position, you know, to do that. Or they will look at different products, a broader product range they offer, you know, on the market. So on both sides, supply chain, as supply side and also a demand side, they will look for more options to source and more options to sell to with more products. And I think this is making sense, and that's one of the important lessons. And of course, when you come into a situation like that, you also learn the hard way that a solid balance sheet is very helpful if you come into financial issues, and a month longer, you know, might be the difference between surviving or not surviving. A month longer of a healthy balance sheet, you know, that you can survive 4 weeks longer without depending on additional income or additional resources, wherever they might come from.
Yeah, a month might be just enough, the difference between restarting and shutting down permanently. Okay, well, again, next time when we have the fourth survey results coming in, we'll sit down and do this again. Hopefully we'll start to see some numbers recover. And then the last thing, I just wanted to compliment you. Kudos on the outstanding piece of art you got over your right shoulder there. Looks like a nice cotton bowl on the wall. So excellent, excellent design.
Yeah, thank you very much. What a coincidence.
Yes, very, very convenient. Yeah. Okay, Christian, thanks very much for your time. We'll do it again in a few weeks and hopefully have a better story to tell.
Thank you, Mike. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.